It's time to take a new approach to finding true fulfillment in your career, health, and state of mind through insightful conversations with those who have found their professional and personal passions while achieving balance. Whether it's entrepreneurs, athletes, or healthcare professionals, we bring you real people, real growth right here on the Boost Podcast. Now, here's your host, Elena Lipson.
Hey Boost Squad, and welcome to episode 11. Elena Lipson here, and I am so excited to introduce today's featured guest, Scott Moody. Scott, are you ready to join the Boost Squad?
I'm as excited as you are, Elena.
Awesome. I love it. So Scott is the co-founder and CEO of K4Connect, which is a company that creates solutions that serve and empower older adults and individuals who are living with disabilities. And they do this through an open technology delivery and management platform that combines home automation, wellness technology, content, and communications. Prior to that, Scott was the co-founder, chairman, and CEO of Authentic, which is the company that developed the technologies that are at the foundation of the Touch ID and the Apple products that many of us use. And while Scott was there, he raised over $70 million in venture capital, and he led the company's successful IPO while growing the company to 300 employees and 200 patents. Authentic was acquired in 2012, making it the only publicly traded company to be acquired by Apple. So that is quite a feat. Scott began his career at Harris Semiconductor in 1980, where he eventually became the division VP of a $200 million division. And in addition to his current work at K4Connect, he's also an entrepreneur in residence for Blackstone Network, an advisor to the National Science Foundation's ASSIST program at NC State University, and a regional board member for Hope International. He's also the founder of Talent First Ventures, which advises and invests in early stage startups in the Southeast and Africa. So needless to say, he's a busy guy. Lots to get into here with you, Scott, today. So why don't we jump right in? So what are the three things that you want us to know about K4Connect?
Well, first off, I think you did a great job in the introduction, and I appreciate that. So if there were three things I'd probably highlight, it starts with who we serve. And you mentioned that, and that's specifically older adults and those living with disabilities. What's amazing about that, and really when we first started the company, we were very focused on technology, really I was inspired to even start the company on a trip to Africa, but then really knew why when I met a gentleman with MS. And that's when we started to focus on the demographics that we serve today. But what I don't think most people realize about these demographics is there's actually 1.5 billion people in the world today that are over the age of 65 or living with a disability. It is a very, very big market, and I think it provides a lot of opportunity for people. 1.5 billion. It's a very large market. The second is we are a very, very mission-centered company. Our mission of the company is to serve the underserved. And those are specifically the demographics that we serve now that are usually underserved by technology. But the fact of the matter is that we really want to reach to everybody in that 1.5 billion people, from people that can live in senior living communities all the way to people that are living in their homes and can't afford a senior living community or home care and are dependent on family, friends, maybe the state, maybe the church. And those are the really people that we want to reach with this idea, of course, of serving the underserved. And that's foundationally our mission for everything we do. And third really follows that, and it's pretty much this idea of a servant-based company, not just focused on trying to make a great return for our investors. We certainly want to provide a good return for our investors, but the fact of the matter is that it's not just about serving the investors. It's first toward that mission of serving the clients, and then everybody else in the ecosystem, both around them or around the company. And we believe that if we do that well, then investors will get a long-term return. But the first focus, of course, is on the client. And then that whole idea of I call it servant capitalism, is using capitalism really to serve what the community around that client, that end user.
I love it. Servant capitalism. So Some of the things that you could be thinking about here is if you're looking to get into a business, while you're thinking about older adults, a lot of people don't think of that as a particularly sexy opportunity. But as Scott mentioned, it's such a huge market and you're able to do something good that's really benefiting society as a whole while you're doing it. So it's a really great space to take a closer look at. And Scott, on that same note, what are some of the things that you see now and in the future when you think about technology for older adults and for people with disabilities?
So, really what we're doing now, providing this platform that integrates every aspect of your life together into a single, very easy to use application. So we really wrap all of those into a single application, which we provide now as part of a product we call K4 Community for senior living communities, and in the future, K4 Life for our clients living in their own homes. But that's just a start. And you just really think of all the new products that are coming out, from food delivery services to autonomous vehicles to all of that are generally focused on millennials or people, in their 40s. And so really what we're doing now is just a start. But what we really want to do is connect all these products and services, things like food delivery services, to those that could really benefit the most. And we really think, to a large extent, for me and you, these are often conveniences. But for the people we serve, they provide real utility and allow them to continue their lives in a very happy, healthy, and of course, simple way.
Yeah, that's so important. And I think the shift in this industry is more and more towards giving people the tools to allow them to continue to live independent lives and have the social engagement with people that they once had and not be constrained by any type of physical mobility issues or ailments that prevent them from moving around or using the services and doing the things that they love. So I really applaud what you guys are doing. I think it's great.
I think too many people really look at an older adult or somebody with a disability as a patient. I'm going to do something to you. I'm going to monitor you, versus give them the tools to live the lives, right, that they have or others have, but just enabled or assisted by technology. It really provides a first order value to our clients. And our clients are the older adults and people living with disability, not looking at them as a patient to be simply told, but as, if you will, just another group of consumers that have demands. And what we provide, of course, provides a lot more utility, again, than a lot of products where for us, it's a convenience and sometimes really just a novelty.
So switching gears a little bit here, I want to understand a little bit. So you had all this success with Authentic. You sold your company to Apple. You grew it from the ground up. And it's such a huge accomplishment. What made you want to go back into this startup world and kind of start all over again?
Well, that's a darn good question. So first off, let me just correct a little bit of what you just said. I did this and I sold the company and you had this success. I mean, the fact of the matter is it really takes, and wrote about this a while ago, founder, startup, I think almost any CEO gets way too much credit for what is truly a team sport. So you mentioned the patents. We had over 200 patents when we were acquired. Those were developed by unbelievably smart engineers, right? And just to kind of highlight how much smarter every single one of them was than me, my name wasn't on a single one, of those patents. So the fact of the matter is I owe a lot to co-founder Dale Setlak, the CTO at Authentic, and of course the team, whether it was in development, marketing, sales. It really was a team effort and a lot of work by everybody. After the acquisition, frankly, if I spoke to you then, anybody else that would listen to me, I said I would never, ever start another company. In fact, I had no plans to ever work again. Really just was going to retire. Wanted to stay involved in startups and that whole ecosystem, which is what drew me to move to Raleigh, the Triangle area, with a great entrepreneurial ecosystem there. But it was actually on a trip to Africa where I met somebody that inspired me to start another company. Her name was Jennifer, and just very quickly she had gone over to Rwanda after the genocide. Ended up opening, I think it was roughly 15 orphanages for the children. Ended up baking cakes for the kids and then selling those cakes around Kigali to help with expenses. Opened a coffee shop, or bought a coffee shop, where she then turned that into a coffee shop / bakery, only employed battered women, to train them to be bakers. And then the idea would be that they would go back to their villages and open up their own small bakery. And I was on that trip associated with Hope International, as you mentioned in the introduction, which is a microfinance organization. And Hope was the funding behind all these little micro bakeries. But when you meet somebody, and it's a longer story, but just to simply put, when you meet somebody like that, I will tell you it was embarrassing. Here I was, I thought I was, giving back, working with a lot of startups, active in all these different things. And then you meet somebody like Jennifer and you feel like a fool. Just the whole idea, when I came back and I spoke to my wife, it was, I'm not burnt out anymore. I'm not dead. I have some energy left. And we were very fortunate, lucky once in a startup. And maybe if we start another company and it's successful, then we could use the proceeds from that, right, to do good things. And that was really the whole idea of jumping back into the startup game. I will tell you, though, working so hard nowadays, there's days I question it. It is just a tremendous amount of work. But I'll be honest, I really love what I do. I love the people I work with. And, I love kind of that whole mission-driven orientation. K4Connect is really the perfect blend of market and mission. And so, that's very fulfilling. And on those days, when you're working hard or things aren't looking so good, that's the thing that kind of drives us all forward.
Great. So it sounds like you had really a very humbling experience in Africa that was impetus for you starting K4Connect. And I'm wondering, it sounds like it was under different circumstances that you started K4Connect versus Authentic. How are things different this time versus the first time you started a company?
I think there's actually more that's similar than different. So here we have at K4Connect, we have a very, very clear mission orientation. And we are very focused on a group of people that we serve that really need, I think, what we do. It wasn't so mission-oriented or specific to a demographic, but a lot of what we did at Authentic is very similar to K4. The example I often use is just the whole idea of payment, mechanisms, even something like Apple Pay. It's certainly a lot easier to use, and it's much more secure. So I use that because it benefits me. When I use it, of course, the benefit flows to others as well. It flows to Apple. It flows to the credit card company. It flows to the merchant, certainly. It flows to the bank. But I don't use it because of them. I use it because of me. And so just as that one example, to take it to K4Connect, right, when we're going in, and I mentioned our first product is K4 Community, and we sell that to the operator, the enterprise. And once they buy it, right, then it's deployed in the rooms, apartments, cottages of all of their residents. But our real focus is on who we refer to as the client, the end user, their resident. All around what I mentioned before, making their lives simpler, healthier, and happier. Our belief is if we do that for the client, if we in fact make their life better, and provide that first order value I spoke of earlier, the value will also flow to the ecosystem around them. It'll flow to their family, it'll flow to the staff at the operator, and it'll flow to the operator themselves because they need to show some kind of return associated with implementing this. And so we're able to show that return by providing a first order value to the client. So in that way, Authentic, the focus on the end user, right, is very similar between Authentic and K4, although clearly the user is significantly different.
Yeah, and I think what I want you to understand from what Scott's saying is that we really need to focus on customer needs and thinking about human-centered design. And so you really need to figure out first, who are you designing for and what is the problem that you're solving of theirs? And companies that do that first are usually much more successful than those that just come up with a solution and then go try to find a market and a customer and a problem that they're solving. So what he says is really applicable across all industries. I think when you're designing products for older adults, sometimes that gets lost because you'll have a lot of really young engineers that are designing these products and might forget or not realize things that are really important when you're thinking about older adults, like maybe they need a different door handle or a different size button or font to read things differently. And so user experience and user design is so critical in all industries, but I think sometimes it gets a little lost in the longevity economy as well. So you mentioned something before, Scott, that I want to go back to. You talked about giving credit to your team. And I want to talk a little bit and hear from you about how you figure out how to pick the right team members and kind of step back and let them do what they do best so you can focus on your strengths.
I will tell you it's not that easy, right? I mean, so first off, I'm a big believer in just a wide range of different disciplines and cultures and views in the company. I often joke there's this idea of you have engineers and data on one side and you have people and feelings on the other. And what you really need to do is be able to mix those two together, really through a combination of the whole team. And so it's very important, number one, not to hire a bunch of people that are all virtually the same, all focused on that left-hand side, right, the engineers and the data. As well, you need to hire people, if you will, from that other side, people, right, regular users, as well as those that understand the feelings and the needs of your end users. So really a very diverse group, I think, is, critically important. It's no different than a team. I mean, when you're putting a team together, you can go get the 5 biggest guys in the NBA, right? But if you don't have somebody to bring up, the ball, it's really not going to make any difference. And so it's all around designing. I mean, in the NBA, it's a tall guy, powerful guy in the middle. They're, a power forward, a shooting forward, shooting guard, and a point guard, generally speaking. And so really what you need to do is have a mix of those various talents. And then you need to make sure that they have the cultural ability to work together. So the cultural ability is that they all work together, in our case, in a very driven environment, just like a sports team, really going to be successful and win and push one another, but not do it in a way where you're blaming one another, right? So the fact of the matter is that knowing who to hire and the kind of talent that you need, and exceedingly smart talent, particularly to make up for me, right? And then the cultural blend to bring all of that together. I joke, though, at the end of every interview, we have a relatively stringent interview process. People come in, they actually present to everybody that's going to speak to them initially. They then review with all those people a problem that we've provided them so they can kind of give their answer. Obviously, that's different for somebody in finance versus engineering versus it was marketing. And then we go through one-on-ones. But at the end, I always sit down with the person. At the end of my interview, I almost try to scare them. And there's 2 things I tell people at the end. One, being in a startup is a lot of work. Just is. You are competing with, other startups all over the world. You are competing against big companies that have thousands of people. You're a much smaller group. And of course, it does take a lot of work. And the second thing, I tell people is Moody is not a wholly inappropriate last name. I am a relatively driven person. I kind of like that sports atmosphere, and we are a driven company. We celebrate. It's a lot of fun. The whole idea of sports is the thrill of winning, if you will. And so we have a very, very driven environment. But finding the right people that fit in that, it takes time. You just can't hire everybody that sends in an interview or everybody that comes in for an interview.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're talking about was that startup being hard work. I want to hear a little bit more about how you took Authentech from being a startup to being as successful as it was, to be going public and being acquired by Apple. What were the 3 tactics that you think were most instrumental in growing your business there?
Well, I'm a big believer in IP and technology, foundational technology, both at Authentech and K4. People had been talking back at Authentech, this whole idea of fingerprint sensors and what they could do. But, frankly, Elaine, I didn't think anybody really had the foundational technology to make the story real. And we developed that. So, you can talk about everything you want about a fingerprint sensor. But if you ever use that Touch ID, it's, exceedingly easy to use. And that is really driven by all those patents, all those smart engineers, and, of course, everything that Apple has added, onto our technology since then. And so, you can tell the story, but it's the tech that makes it real. And I think the same thing is true for K4Connect when people were talking about home automation and all these things. When it came to real home automation, I thought the systems were either far too expensive or far too hard to use. And so really for the first year and a half of the company, we really just focused on the technology. I think that's the thing that probably differentiates us from anybody else in the market. You don't see it, you don't feel it. Most people don't want to talk about it, right? But technology to me is only really successful when you stop calling it technology and it becomes ubiquitous part of your everyday life. So kind of that foundational competitive advantage, IP orientation, I think that's really important for a startup. The second is the team. Just like I said before, I think that is absolutely so critical. You can be a great coach, but if you don't have the right players on the field, it really doesn't make any difference how many diagrams you have, how many ideas you have. The fact of the matter is, it is the team. And I think something that I think that's important, particularly for the early people, you're going to spend a lot of time with these people. You better make sure you all get along together. So that whole idea of intellect and the cultural fit is incredibly important. It's the team that's going to win the Super Bowl in 2 weeks. It's not the coach. It's not the owner. It's not the people in the stands. It is the team that's actually going to make, that idea real. And I think the third element is just focus. To understand where you're going and stay focused in that area. Needless to say, you're going to have little turns as you go forward, but understanding, really what you're trying to do and have a focused plan to get there. I watched too many people, rail from one thing to the next, trying to find, the right place without really understanding where they want to go long term and staying on a plan to go do that. It takes a lot longer than people think. To be that overnight success takes roughly 7 to 10 years. But the fact of the matter is, I think too many people really in a startup world lose their focus and they rail from one idea to the next, just trying to find anything. So there's really those three things: the foundational technology, the team, and focus.
Great. And you and your team have had a lot of success along the way, but there has to have been times when you guys stagnated, you stopped making progress, you took a few steps back. Can you tell me about one of those times and how you kind of overcame that and kept moving forward afterwards?
I think there's really, in very general terms, that whole idea of it takes a long time to be an overnight success. And you're going to have a lot of those, situations. And then just really understanding where you're going, what you may have to change without railing from side to side and kind of trying to stay on that path. But I will tell you that, not long after we went public in 2007, which, I'm glad we did. We had the cash, but then 2008 and 2009 happened. And of course, at the time, Authentic was high-end laptops to a large extent. And all of a sudden, there was no such thing as a high-end laptop. Everybody was talking about $300 and $400 netbooks. So, we stayed, focused in what we were doing, but instead of, really cutting back engineering, we actually put more into engineering during that downturn. And we actually pulled in some of the product roadmap things that we had seen, particularly around mobile.
That's great. That's really interesting because I think you hear about a lot of things that happen in a downturn. You gave a great example. There's also things with other companies where they'll cut training budgets and things like that. And, there's been studies that show that's what you definitely shouldn't cut during a downturn because, you lose talent and people don't get new skills. And so it's interesting to hear that you stuck to your roadmap and actually accelerated some things on it. So that's a great tip for you to take from Scott right there. So Scott, you do a lot of things in addition to being the co-founder of this startup, which sounds like more than a full-time job. So how do you create some work-life balance and take some time for yourself?
Well, first off, I actually like work. So to me, it's my sport. It's, the thrill of victory, agony of defeat. Look, if I have as bigger, faster, taller, really had any athletic ability whatsoever, I would have loved to have been an athlete, a professional athlete, and then a coach. I could easily be the guy on the sideline running up and down, yelling with the veins popping out of his neck. That's me, right? So work, to me is my sport. Sometimes when I hear this whole idea of work-life balance, I actually think it's a mingling of the two. And I hear a lot about work-life balance, often by people that don't like work. In other words, get me out of here so I can go do what I really enjoy. And so one of the things we try to find in the teams that we hire is, one, particularly in K4Connect now, do you share the mission? And do you enjoy what you do? Right? Otherwise, you just have people beating on you to work more, and that's no fun. We want people that are self-motivated, right, or creative in their own right and come up with their own ideas. And you only do that if you're enjoying what you're doing. But at the same time, for me, work is by far not the most important thing in my life. When we went public at Authentic, we opened the stock exchange that morning, and my 3 daughters actually were on stage and actually rang the bell to open the stock exchange. So those are the things that I share. Even though that they're older now, we see them, frankly, all of the time. So I really think, people that have, to some extent, that work-life problem maybe aren't in the right job, and they're just trying to get away. And then the other side is, look, if you don't really like what you do, if you don't like your job, it's going to be a big part of your life, no matter how much you argue about work-life balance. And when you go home, you're not happy, right? You're frustrated. And so, I think one of the biggest things that people have a problem or challenge with is when they particularly talk about work-life balance, they're probably in the wrong work. And the biggest success toward work-life balance is not just leaving at 5 to get away from that job, right? It's actually having a job that you like. And so you are generally a happier person. So the rest of your life is happy as well. So I think that's really the most important aspect, is finding something that you're happy in. At the same time, you do have to watch it. Right? It's easy just to work all the time. And you just need to make sure that you're setting the right priorities in life as well. But look, I'll just tell you, being in a startup is a lot of work. And it's, frankly, not for everyone.
I think, I want you really to take note of what Scott's saying. If you're finding yourself feeling like your work-life balance is out of whack and you dread going into work every day and that you're just waiting for Friday to kick in every week, you need to have some serious thinking time with yourself about whether you're happy and you're really doing what you want to be doing. And if not, do some soul searching, because there's something out there that you probably are passionate about. Maybe you haven't found it yet, but no one should have to go through life dreading every morning that they wake up and go to work and just waiting for 5 o'clock or whenever they get out so that they can go do something else. So Scott, let's go ahead and close with a parting piece of guidance for us.
Honestly, I think in the end of the day, it really comes down to, a life of serving others. Frankly, I think I am exceedingly blessed in my life, from, loving parents to a great wife now of 36 years, to loving children, to, people I've worked with. And I think I look at that, not to necessarily look at it as creating your own wealth. Just the whole idea of being born in this country, or having the opportunity to come to this country. I've traveled to a lot of places. We live in a great place. Just that attitude of serving others, whether it's your wife, whether it's your children, whether it's your customers or clients or your community, I think it's actually very important. And almost anything you read tells you, right, that if you go forward with that attitude, you will live a happier life. I will also tell you, though, that for some people, that's unbelievably easy. My wife is an unbelievably nice person. I always joke with her, like, I should get in heaven before her, because for me, having that, servant, I have to push myself to do that, right? Some people like my wife and so many others talked about Martha earlier, our head of marketing, just are these people that are outwardly nice. But I do believe that, at least for myself and so many others, we have all these blessings in life. And it's not just to sit on all those blessings. It's actually to use those to give to others.
That's awesome. So if you're sitting here looking for how you can find more meaning in your life or more happiness in what you're doing, think about how you can have a life of serving others. So I hope today's episode inspires you to think more about how you can find your passion and live your best life. For more information, including links to resources that Scott and I chatted about today and how best to get in touch with Scott, head on over to our website, theboostpodcast.com, and check out our show notes from this episode and catch the Boost bonus. Scott, I want to thank you for sharing your journey with us today. And remember, anything is possible for you.
Now that you've completed this episode, the next step is to join the Boost Squad for strategic insights, tips, and tricks, as well as exclusive resources designed specifically to accelerate your personal and professional growth. All this and more is waiting for you at theboostpodcast.com.